The last will and testament of Alexander the Great was hidden from the public view for centuries, claims an author. Alexander the Great, we know, lived around 330 BC. He was one of the most capable military leaders in known history and is considered by many to be the greatest Greek who ever lived. And Alexander the Great left his mark on history with his campaign in Persia, bringing Greek culture to the depths of Asia, establishing cities that still stand today. For example, he established Alexandria, Egypt, and as a prime example, and marking the beginning of the Hellenistic period and domination of Greek culture and the Greek way of thinking in the known world, even the language of Greek in the known world, in fact, which in turn influenced and shaped the course of history for centuries after. The contact with Greek culture and the largely Hellenized East profoundly influenced Rome, while it's doubtful whether the spread of Christianity would have been possible without the Hellenistic Commonwealth. But despite its splendor, the Hellenistic period was also a politically and military turbulent period, especially in its beginning. Alexander's sudden death created a power vacuum which immediately led to conflicts between his generals, which shocked the Hellenistic world, and the end result was the dismemberment of the empire into the Hellenistic kingdoms of the successors. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. So Alexander's death meant that his heirs did not inherit his empire. It was divided between his generals and successors. His legal successor, Alexander IV, from his wife Roxane. Roxane, as we know, was the daughter of the Persian Darius, did not manage to become king, as he was poisoned together with his mother by order of Cassander, while Stratira, daughter of Darius and second wife of Alexander, did not manage to give birth to a child who was pregnant, as he had earlier been murdered in the orders of Roxane, who wanted to ensure that her son would take over the empire. So you can understand what was going on. It's also worth noting that while Alexander was bleeding, he was asked, that means when he was sick, he was asked as to who he was leading the empire to, and he replied, "Hold on," as loudly as possible, causing the conflict to break out as soon as he died, although it is not said that he actually mentioned in the it mentions something that very conveniently was challenged by the other claimants. In any case, to whom Alexander wanted to leave his throne is a historical mystery worthy of the location of his tomb. However, a British researcher claims in his book that he found the real will of the Macedonian king, which according to himself was hidden in public view in a text which has been known for centuries. The source referred to by David Grant, author of In Search of the Lost Testament of Alexander the Great, is Alexander the Great, a collection of myths and legends about the epic feats of the great mercenary, the first edition in which dates back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, that is centuries after Alexander died. The novel of Alexander contains many folk legends, with the Macedonian king acquiring the dimensions of a mythical hero. Several of the legends were created shortly after Alexander's death and apparently circulated for centuries and formed the basis of Alexander's novel. They are supposed to be based on the works of Callisthenes, historian of Alexander the Great, but this is considered unlikely, as Callisthenes died before Alexander. So often the foundations of the novel are attributed to the pseudo-Callisthenes. It's worth noting that according to Plutarch, years after the death of the Macedonian king Alexander the Great, another historian, Onesicritus, read to Lysimachus, Alexander's general who later became king, a story about a love affair between Alexander and queen of the mythical Amazons, Thalistris, with the result that Lysimachus comments quote, "I wonder where I was then," end quote. So it is easy to understand what stories and legends were circulating for years after. So as it is easily understood, the novel of Alexander is not considered a historical source, but a collection of myths, products of fantasy. Nevertheless, it is a work that remained popular for centuries, going through the Middle Ages and reaching to the present day, having been translated into many languages, and clearly influencing the image of Alexander the Great for many years after his death. This piece is generally considered a product of fantasy, but Grant, after 10 years of research, claims that it is authentic and that, in fact, this will was buried by his generals, as he clearly named his unborn son, Alexander IV, as his successor. It's noted that many high-ranking Macedonians were reluctant to accept the son of Alexander as a barbarian as king. It's recalled that many had reacted to his policies that promoted fermentation between the two cultures with mixed marriages, inclusion of young army, provision of Greek education to the conquered peoples, etc. Grant estimates that this last will and testament, despite its burial, was saved and leaked by one of the general's claimants as a document, a political propaganda weapon against his opponents, with the result that it circulated for years and passed at some point in the novel of Alexander, and there to be considered equivalent to the rest of the material of the work, that is, not a real historical document, but a myth. As he claims, precisely because it was used as a manifesto propaganda tool in the context of the successors' conflicts, its authenticity was questioned, as a result of which it was included in the category of myths and more. In other words, everybody probably thought that it was whipped up at the spur of the moment for the person that wrote it to claim that he was a successor. Now, Grant also points out that it was very convenient, quote unquote, for the contenders for the throne not to leave a clear successor to Alexander, as this opened the crown game where everyone was free and justified to try to seize the power, something that reinforces a view of burying any will or statement of Alexander the Great in his last days. I've translated this for you from a Greek article, but let's remember what the Archangel Gabriel in the Old Testament told the prophet Daniel, who the Archangel told Daniel about Alexander the Great coming, the little horn out of the north, and that would put a stop to the big horn, meaning Persia, and that he would die young and only reign for 10 years, and that his empire would be split into four and would not go to any of his heirs. This is exactly what happened to Alexander the Great. So that was a divine message by the Archangel Gabriel to the prophet Daniel. I'll leave a link below for you for this. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.